For 40,000 years, the galaxy had lived with a single comforting lie. Humanity was gone. Their worlds were silent, their fleets reduced to drifting wreckage, their names spoken only in history chambers and military academies as a warning. To most species, humans were not a tragedy, they were a lesson. A species too aggressive, too inventive, too uncontrollable to survive its own brilliance. When Earth vanished from every sensor grid long ago, the great powers of the galaxy had quietly exhaled in relief. The problem had solved itself. Commander Lyra Voss had grown up with those stories. Every Valori child did. Humans were the reason interstellar law existed. The reason weapon treaties were strict. The reason no species was ever allowed to expand too quickly again. And yet, in all her 3 centuries of service, Lyra had never expected to hear that name spoken on the bridge of her ship. Especially not now. The ethereal tide drifted through the outer spiral arm, an expanse of space so empty it felt unfinished, like a section of the universe that had been forgotten during creation. For 3 months, Lyra's crew of 40 scientists and security officers had catalogued nothing but dust clouds, cold stars, and dead rock. No pirates. No anomalies. No discoveries worth reporting. Boredom had become routine. Lyra floated near the central command ring, reviewing outdated survey logs for the 3rd time that week, when a nervous voice broke the silence. "Commander, I'm detecting something." She turned toward the communications station. ZTH, barely 2 centuries old and still glowing with youthful color, stared at his console as if it might explode. "What kind of something?" Lyra asked, already grateful for the interruption. ZTH hesitated. His 4 eyes flicked between readouts. "A signal. Extremely weak. Ancient. I almost filtered it out as background noise. Source. A frozen planetoid. Designation KX. 7791. Lyra frowned. That object was well documented. Small, lifeless, barely 500 kilometers wide. No atmosphere worth mentioning. No history. No reason for anything to be transmitting from it. "Why are you hesitating?" she asked. ZTH swallowed. "Because the encryption pattern matches a classified archive." The bridge grew quieter. "Which archive?" Lyra pressed. ZTH's voice dropped. "Human." The word landed like a physical blow. Every officer froze. Consoles hummed softly, suddenly far too loud. Even the ship's ambient lights seemed harsher. "That's not possible," Lyra said sharply. "Humans went extinct 40,000 years ago." "I ran the analysis 4 times, ZTH replied, hand shaking slightly. "It's old, older than most of our civilizations, but it's undeniably human in origin." Lyra stared at the projection hovering above the console, a faint, fragmented signal pulse repeating on an interval so long it felt intentional. A message waiting for someone patient enough to find it. Protocol was clear. Anything related to humanity was to be reported directly to the Galactic Conclave. No exceptions. No delays. Lyra knew what would happen next if she followed procedure. A fleet. Scientists. Politicians. Fear. And fear, when mixed with the memory of humans, always led to violence. "Set a course for KX 7791, she said. The bridge snapped to attention. Her first officer turned slowly. "Commander, should we not inform the Conclave first?" Lyra met his gaze. "We will, after we know what we're looking at. I won't ignite a galactic panic over a ghost signal." A tense pause. "Maximum speed," she added. "And this conversation stays on this bridge." The crew nodded, though fear lingered in their expressions. Humans weren't just history. They were the reason nightmares still existed in interstellar memory. The journey took 2 days. As the ethereal tide entered orbit, the planetoid appeared exactly as expected. A frozen sphere wrapped in methane ice, scarred by ancient impacts. "Dead. Empty." Then the sensors screamed. "There's a structure beneath the northern ice shelf," ZTH reported, his voice barely steady. "Metallic. Artificial. Massive." "How massive?" Lyra asked. A long pause. "Commander, it's larger than anything I've ever seen." Lyra ordered a landing party immediately. Against every instinct of caution, She chose to lead it herself. The descent was brutal. Frozen gas winds battered their shuttle, forcing the pilot to wrestle for control until the ground finally rose to meet them. When the ramp lowered, Lyra stepped out into absolute darkness. Silence. Nothing else. Then she saw it. A door. Perfectly rectangular. Smooth metal embedded directly into the ice wall, untouched by time or corrosion. Above it, etched symbols glowed faintly as her suit lights passed over them. Her breath caught. ZTH's translator chimed, struggling before finally producing the words. Vault 7. Shepard Initiative. For those who remember US. The door slid open on its own. Warm air spilled out, carrying unfamiliar scents and a sense, deep, irrational, undeniable, that something inside had been waiting. Lyra took her first step forward. Her boots echoed against metal. And for the first time in 40,000 years, humanity opened its door. The moment Lyra crossed the threshold, the universe felt different. The air inside the structure was warm, impossibly warm for a frozen planetoid drifting in deep space. It brushed against her skin through the seals of her suit, carrying faint traces of metal, ozone, and something organic she couldn't identify. Behind her, the landing team hesitated. "Commander," Brent, her security chief, muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. "This place shouldn't exist." Lyra didn't disagree, but she kept moving. As soon as the last member stepped inside, the massive door sealed itself shut with a whisper-soft click. Lights ignited along the corridor, illuminating smooth metallic walls that stretched far beyond what their scanners had predicted. "This corridor is endless," ZTH whispered, staring at his readings. "My instruments can't find the end." They advanced cautiously, weapons raised, footsteps echoing like distant thunder. Panels lined the walls, each glowing faintly as they passed. Lyra slowed when she realized what she was seeing. Languages. Dozens of them. Some ancient, some modern, some belonging to species long extinct. Personal messages scrolled beside warnings. Historical records beside what looked like diary entries. "This isn't just a bunker," Lyra said softly. "It's an archive. An archive built to outlast civilizations." They walked for nearly an hour before the corridor finally widened. The ceiling vanished into darkness above them, swallowing their lights. When the chamber opened fully before their eyes, Lyra's legs nearly gave out. The room was enormous, city-sized. Rows upon rows of crystal pods stretched into the darkness, each glowing with a soft blue light. Inside them floated figures suspended in perfect stillness. Humans. Men. Women. Children. Thousands of them. Alive. "No," Brent whispered. "That's not possible." Lyra felt her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She had studied human physiology for decades. She knew what their bodies looked like, strong, dense, built for gravity worlds and violence alike. And yet, what she saw now was peaceful. Faces relaxed. Hands unclenched. Bodies untouched by time. "They're in stasis," ZTH said, awed. "Perfectly preserved." "Commander, some of these readings suggest they've been here longer than the Valori civilization. 40,000 years. Humanity hadn't died. They had slept." As Lyra stepped deeper into the chamber, a soft chime echoed through the air. The lights dimmed, then refocused toward the center of the vault. A shape formed. Light bent inward, pixels and photons weaving together until a human woman stood before them. Gray-haired, tired-eyed, her posture calm and deliberate. She looked directly at Lyra. "Hello," the woman said gently. "My name is Grace Martinez. Welcome to Vault 7. Brent nearly fired on instinct. Lyra raised a hand. "Stand down." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're a hologram," Lyra said. "Yes," Grace replied. "And no, I am an artificial intelligence modeled from the neural imprint of the original Grace Martinez. I have been the caretaker of this vault for a very long time." "How long?" Lyra asked. Grace smiled faintly. 40,112 years. Silence crashed down on the chamber. Lyra forced herself to breathe. "You're telling me humanity chose to hide itself for 40 millennia?" "We chose to wait," Grace corrected. "There is a difference." She gestured, and the pods around them brightened slightly. These people volunteered. Scientists, engineers, teachers, farmers, children who trusted their parents. They believed the future could be better than the present. Lyra struggled to find words. The galaxy believes your species went extinct. Grace nodded. That was intentional. Why? ZTH asked. Why disappear? Grace's expression shifted. Sorrow layered over patience. Because the galaxy was afraid of us, she said. And they were right to be. She moved deeper into the chamber, and Lyra followed despite every instinct screaming caution. Humanity had reached a crossroads, Grace continued. War with the galactic powers was inevitable. We could have fought. We might even have won. Brent stiffened. You admit that? Yes, Grace replied calmly. And in doing so, we would have justified every fear ever held about us. She stopped beside one pod, a young human male with dark hair and a peaceful expression. This is Daniel, Grace said. In the age he was born, anger was praised. Violence was rewarded. Conflict was culture. Lyra studied the sleeping face. He looked ordinary. What changed? Lyra asked. We did, Grace said. Or rather, we chose to. The Shepherd Initiative, she explained, had been humanity's last gamble. Instead of conquering the galaxy, or being destroyed by it, they would remove themselves entirely. 7 vaults, hidden across the stars, filled with volunteers willing to abandon their era, their power, their pride. Before entering stasis, every sleeper underwent extensive transformation. Genetic therapy to reduce aggression, psychological conditioning to encourage empathy, cultural education focused on cooperation over dominance. We did not erase what made us human, Grace said firmly. We refined it. Lyra crossed her arms. You expect the galaxy to believe you cured your own nature. No, Grace replied softly. We expect the galaxy to judge us by what we do when we wake. A sudden crackle sounded in Lyra's communicator. Commander, Zina's voice came through, tense. I'm detecting external signals. Another ship has entered the system. Lyra's blood ran cold. What species? A pause. Kalori. The name echoed like a death sentence. Humanity's oldest enemy. Lyra looked back at the endless rows of sleeping humans, then at Grace's calm, unblinking eyes. The galaxy was about to remember its greatest fear. And this time, humanity was awake enough to face it. The name Kalori carried weight. Not just political weight, but historical gravity. They were one of the oldest powers in the galaxy, architects of the original anti-human coalitions, veterans of wars so destructive that entire star systems were still marked as forbidden zones. If anyone would demand humanity's annihilation without hesitation, it would be them. Lyra turned sharply toward ZTH. How close are they? Entering high orbit, he replied. Scout-class vessel, but heavily armed. That detail mattered. Kalori scouts were not explorers. They were eyes for invasion fleets. Lyra felt the vault pressing in around her, not physically, but emotionally. Thousands of sleeping humans. 40,000 years of waiting. One wrong word now could end everything in fire. I'm returning to the surface, she said. Maintain silence from the vault. No transmissions. Grace inclined her head. I understand. I will remain here. As Lyra turned to leave, Grace added quietly, Commander, they will be afraid. Please remember that fear is louder than reason. Lyra didn't answer. She wasn't sure reason would survive what was coming. The frozen wind howled across the landing site as Lyra exited the vault and reboarded the shuttle. The ascent felt heavier than the descent, as though the planetoid itself wanted to hold her in place. On the bridge of the ethereal tide, tension crackled through the air. The Kalori ship loomed on the main display, angular, dark, bristling with weapon arrays. A predator's silhouette. They're hailing us, the communications officer said. Lyra straightened. Put them through. The image resolved into a Kalori captain, segmented armor plates, burning amber eyes, mandibles held rigid in suspicion. This is Captain Rex of the Kalori Dominion, he snapped. Valori vessel, state your purpose in this system. Lyra kept her voice measured. Routine geological survey. Rex's eyes narrowed. On a dead planetoid? We study anomalies, Lyra replied. Even lifeless ones. The Calori captain studied her for a long moment. Your ship's power profile suggests prolonged station keeping. You're hiding something. Lyra met his stare. You're welcome to scan us. The bluff was risky, but effective. The Calori scanned anyway, their instruments unable to penetrate the vault's shielding. Rex clicked his mandibles in irritation. Very well. We will report this encounter. Lyra's stomach tightened. A report was all it would take. Safe travels, Captain, she said. The Calori ship disengaged and jumped to faster than light, vanishing in a flare of distorted space. The bridge exhaled as one. But Lyra knew better. That wasn't the end, she said quietly. Over the next 3 days, Lyra returned to the vault repeatedly. Grace answered every question with relentless patience. She explained the stasis systems, the safeguards, the failsafes. She showed Lyra the historical records, humanity's final years before disappearing. What Lyra saw unsettled her. There was no record of defeat, no last stand. Instead, there were debates, protests, tears, families torn apart over the decision to sleep or stay behind. Humanity had not been wiped out. They had walked away. We refused to become what the galaxy expected us to be, Grace explained. Victory through annihilation would have proven them right. Lyra sat alone in the vault one night, surrounded by the quiet hum of life support systems older than her species' recorded history. If the Conclave learns about this, Lyra said, they'll send fleets. Some will demand your destruction. Yes, Grace replied. You're not afraid? Grace considered the question. I am afraid for them, she said, gesturing to the pods. But fear is not a reason to abandon our principles. Then what is your plan? Lyra asked. Grace looked at her. To be judged. The judgment came sooner than expected. Zetich burst into the vault chamber, breathless. Commander. Multiple ships entering the system. Diplomatic codes. Scientific vessels. Military escorts. Lyra closed her eyes. The secret was out. Within hours, KX 7791 became the most crowded dead rock in the galaxy. Camps formed across the ice. Scientists argued. Soldiers watched each other with hands near triggers. And at the center of it all, the vault waited. Grace greeted every delegation the same way. Calm, transparent, unwavering. Some listened. Some did not. Then General Vex arrived. Unlike the scout captain, Vex brought warships. A small fleet, but more than enough to turn the planetoid into debris. He marched straight toward the vault entrance, ignoring protests from Valori diplomats and Novari scientists alike. Lyra intercepted him. General, the Conclave hasn't reached a decision. Vex's eyes burned with ancient hatred. I don't need their permission. Grace appeared between them, her holographic form shimmering. How may I assist you, General Vex? She asked politely. You can start by deactivating this facility, Vex snarled. Humanity is a disease, and diseases are eradicated. These people have harmed no one, Grace replied. They have slept for 40,000 years. Vex laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. Predators don't stop being predators just because they're asleep. If that were true, Grace said evenly, your species would still be devouring its neighbors. The insult landed. Vex stepped closer. If the Conclave chooses mercy, I will ignore it. Lyra felt ice settle in her chest. You would start a war? She asked. If that's what it takes, Vex replied. Some threats are too dangerous to spare. He turned and left. Lyra stared after him, heart pounding. Grace's voice was soft behind her. This is the moment we prepared for. Lyra turned. Prepared how? Grace looked back toward the sleeping humans. By choosing not to become monsters, even now. Lyra realized then that the galaxy's greatest test was no longer about humanity. It was about everyone else. The standoff began without a single shot fired. General Vex's fleet formed a tight crescent in high orbit above KX 7791. Weapons charged, targeting solutions locked. From the surface, their silhouettes glimmered like cold stars, symbols of what the galaxy did when fear outweighed conscience. Lyra stood outside the vault entrance, staring up at them. She had faced pirates, mutinies, and spatial disasters in her career, but nothing like this. This wasn't a tactical problem. It was a moral one, and there were no simulations for that. Inside the temporary command dome, representatives from a dozen species argued non-stop. The Galactic Conclave had declared an emergency session, but debate moved slower than weapons. They should be destroyed immediately, a Calorian voice snarled. They haven't harmed anyone, a Novari scientist shot back. This is reckless sentimentality, another voice barked. Lyra left them to their noise and returned to the vault. Grace waited for her near the central chamber, surrounded by the soft glow of sleeping humans. He's serious, Lyra said. Vex will attack if he thinks the vote won't go his way. Yes, Grace replied. I anticipated that. Lyra turned sharply. Then why aren't you activating defenses? You said you had technology beyond anything we've seen. Grace nodded. We do. Then use it, Lyra snapped. You don't deserve to die because of old fears. Grace's expression softened, but her answer did not change. If we fight, she said, we confirm every nightmare humanity ever inspired. Power won through violence would undo 40,000 years of sacrifice. Lyra felt frustration rise. So you'll just let them kill you? No, Grace said gently. We will let them choose. The next morning, Grace made her move. Without warning, the vault's communication arrays activated. Signals flooded the system, not as encrypted bursts or military commands, but as open broadcasts. Every ship, every surface camp, every listening post. Screens flickered to life. Lyra's breath caught as images filled the displays. Human memories. A woman holding her infant, whispering lullabies before entering stasis. A man carving a wooden toy, knowing his child would wake without him. Children laughing in vault corridors, unaware of the hatred waiting beyond the stars. Grace's voice accompanied the images, calm and steady. We know what our ancestors did, she said. We carry that shame even now. But we are not our ancestors. We are their hope. The broadcast continued. Educational programs. Psychological conditioning. Voluntary consent recordings. Humans choosing transformation, knowing they would never return to their era. We did not hide to grow stronger, Grace said. We hid to become better. On Vex flagship, officers watched in silence. Some looked away. Some wept. The general himself stood rigid, eyes locked on the screen. They're lying, one of his commanders muttered. But doubt had already begun its quiet work. The broadcast ended with a single message. Judge us by our choices, not by our history. Hours passed. Then days. The conclave finally delivered its verdict. Humanity would be given one chance. A limited awakening. Constant oversight. Immediate termination if aggression was detected. It was not acceptance, but it was survival. Relief rippled through the system. But Vex did not stand down. That night, his fleet shifted formation. Attack vectors. Lyra felt the change before the alarms sounded. He's ignoring the decision, she whispered. Weapons across the defensive fleet powered up. Mostly research ships, transports, vessels never meant for war. They were outmatched. Badly. Lyra opened a channel to Vex. General, stand down. This will start a war. War is preferable to extinction, Vex replied coldly. Lyra looked toward the vault, heart pounding. Grace appeared beside her, calm as ever. It's time, Grace said. For what? Lyra asked. To trust the galaxy. Ships began arriving. Not Calori. Not Valori alone. Novari transports. Mallory cruisers. Independent research vessels. Even species Lyra didn't recognize. They formed a line between Vex fleet and the planetoid. Outnumbered. Outgunned. But unmoving. A transmission echoed across open space. We will not allow this, a voice declared. Humanity deserves a chance. If you fire on us all. Lyra recognized many of the commanders. Scientists who had visited the vault, officers who had watched the broadcast, beings changed by what they had seen. Vex stared at the growing wall of ships. He could still win, but the cost would shatter the galaxy. For 7 days, the standoff held. No shots fired. No orders given. Fear pressed against restraint. On the 7th day, Vex requested a private meeting. Lyra met him aboard a neutral shuttle. "You've turned this into a spectacle," he said bitterly. "You turned it into a test," Lyra replied. Vex was silent for a long moment. "If I attack, history will remember me as a butcher." "And if you don't?" Lyra asked. "Then I have to accept that I might be wrong." That was the hardest choice of all. Hours later, his fleet withdrew. Back in the vault, Grace stood watching the sleeping humans. "We survived," Lyra said, exhausted. Grace nodded. This time, Lyra frowned. "You don't sound relieved." Grace turned to her. "Survival is only the beginning. Acceptance will take generations." Lyra looked at the pods, at Daniel, at the thousands who trusted a future they would never see. "When they wake," Lyra said, "the galaxy won't be ready." Grace smiled faintly. "Neither were we. But readiness comes from trying." Deep within the vault, systems began to shift. For the first time in 40,000 years, humanity prepared to open its eyes. The awakening chamber lay deep within Vault 7, far below the endless rows of sleeping pods. It was circular, quiet, and flooded with soft white light. Medical systems hummed with a precision that bordered on reverence. 12 pods stood at the center, chosen not for strength or authority, but for stability, adaptability, and compassion. Humanity's first representatives. Lyra stood near the observation rail, hands clasped behind her back. She had faced armadas and ultimatums, yet nothing in her career made her pulse race like this moment. Grace hovered beside the control interface. "They've been asleep for over 40 millennia, Lyra said. "How will they handle this?" Grace's voice was calm. "With fear, with wonder, and with hope. The same way they entered stasis." She activated the sequence. The chamber temperature rose gradually. Blue light within the pods shifted toward white. Monitoring screens flickered as long-dormant neural pathways began firing again. Fingers twitched. Chests rose and fell. Life resumed. Lyra held her breath as the first pod hissed open. The man inside coughed weakly, blinking against the light. He looked around slowly, taking in the alien architecture, the unfamiliar faces. "It worked," he whispered hoarsely. "We made it." Grace stepped forward, her expression warm with something unmistakably human. "Yes, Daniel," she said. "You made it. Welcome to the future." Daniel pushed himself upright, gaze drifting to Lyra. For a fraction of a second, she felt the old fear surge. This was a human, descendant of warriors, engineers of extinction-level weapons. Then he smiled. Not a predator's grin. A grateful one. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving us a chance." Something inside Lyra cracked. One by one, the others awoke. Confusion. Tears. Quiet laughter. "Oh." They asked questions, about time, about the galaxy, about whether the experiment had succeeded. Grace answered each with care. "You are not here to conquer," she told them. "You are here to learn." News of the awakening spread faster than light. Some worlds celebrated. Others panicked. Protests erupted on calorie worlds. Fear-fueled rhetoric flooded galactic networks. "They're pretending. They'll revert. It's only a matter of time." Lyra watched it all from the Vault's surface command center, exhaustion weighing on her. "They're afraid," she said. Grace nodded. "So were we once." The awakened humans were moved to a monitored habitat within the Vault's upper levels. Scientists from multiple species observed their behavior closely. There was no aggression, no territorial displays, no hidden buildup of weapons. Instead, there were conversations, curiosity, an overwhelming desire to understand. Daniel spent hours speaking with Novari researchers, fascinated by their bioluminescent communication. Another human, Mara, volunteered for cross-species medical studies, offering her time without hesitation. They're normal, a Valori biologist muttered in disbelief. Lyra corrected him quietly. They're better than normal. They're intentional. 2 weeks later, the conclave summoned Grace and a human representative to address them directly. Daniel was chosen. As he stood in the vast assembly hall, surrounded by beings who had feared his species for 40,000 years, Lyra felt pride tighten her chest. Daniel spoke without grand speeches or defiance. "We know what our ancestors did," he said. "We don't ask you to forget it. We ask you to judge us for what we choose now." Wrath, High Sovereign of the Kalori, rose slowly. "Words are easy," he growled. "Power reveals truth." Daniel nodded. "Then don't give us power yet. Give us responsibility." The chamber fell silent. Months passed. No incidents. No betrayals. Human volunteers joined disaster relief missions, refusing weapons even when offered. They shared medical techniques refined during stasis research. They listened more than they spoke. Fear didn't vanish, but it weakened. One night, Lyra stood with Grace overlooking the frozen horizon. "You won," Lyra said. Grace shook her head. "We survived. Winning is still far away." "What happens when more wake?" Lyra asked. Grace looked toward the stars. "Then the real test begins." Far away, on a Kalori world, Wrath watched reports with growing unease. 10 years would pass like a heartbeat to him. But even he could not deny the evidence. Humanity was not rising as conquerors. They were returning as something else. And the galaxy would never be able to unsee it. 10 years passed faster than anyone expected. For most species in the galaxy, a decade was barely a breath, especially to the long-lived races who remembered the human wars as if they had happened yesterday. Many believed that time would reveal the truth, that beneath the calm smiles and cooperative gestures, humanity's old nature would resurface. It never did. Human settlements, small, carefully regulated enclaves, emerged on neutral worlds under conclave supervision. They were not fortified. They carried no planetary weapons. Their defenses were minimal by design. Instead, they built hospitals, research centers, agricultural domes that fed more mouths than they were required to. Lyra watched it all from a distance at first. After retiring from deep space survey duty, she had taken on an unofficial role as a liaison between the Valori and the growing human communities. It was strange how natural it felt, standing among humans without fear, sharing meals, laughing at misunderstandings that once would have been unthinkable. The humans worked differently than anyone expected. They asked permission constantly. They documented everything. They refused unilateral authority even when it was offered. "We don't want to rule," Daniel once told her during a joint relief mission on a storm-ravaged Novari moon. "We want to belong." That distinction mattered. Across the galaxy, disaster zones became humanity's quiet proving ground. When a Mallory colony station lost power after a stellar flare, human engineers were among the first to arrive. When a plague threatened a fringe world, human doctors volunteered to enter quarantine zones alongside local medics. They did not demand recognition. They simply showed up. And slowly, reluctantly, the galaxy began to change its language. Not the human threat, but the human question. Grace watched from afar. After the final vault had opened and its sleepers awakened, she had gradually reduced her presence. Her work, she said, was complete. Humanity no longer needed a caretaker. Still, she occasionally appeared to Lyra. Brief, flickering moments. "They're doing well," Lyra told her during one such visit. "Yes," Grace replied. "Better than we dared hope." "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked. "Letting them face the galaxy without you?" Grace smiled faintly. "Growth requires absence." The Galactic Conclave convened its largest session in recorded history. At the center of the chamber stood Dr. Samuel Price, one of the original architects of the Shepherd Initiative. Older now, slower, but carrying a quiet authority that silenced the room. "I request provisional membership for humanity," he said. The reaction was immediate. Some delegates applauded. Others hissed. High Sovereign Wrath rose, ancient and unyielding. 10 years is nothing, he declared. Good behavior does not erase instinct. Samuel nodded. "We don't ask you to forget the past. We ask you to judge the present." He gestured, and the chamber displays lit up. Statistics. Lives saved. Worlds stabilized. Conflicts de-escalated through human mediation. Wrath's silence spoke louder than his rage. The vote was close. Too close. In the end, humanity was granted provisional membership, limited authority, restricted expansion, constant oversight. It was not trust, but it was recognition. Lyra watched from the gallery, emotion tightening her chest. She had mapped empty space her entire life, believing discovery meant finding new stars. She had been wrong. Discovery meant finding new possibilities. After the session, she met Samuel in a quiet garden overlooking the conclave city. "We didn't get everything," he said. "You got something better," Lyra replied. "Time." Samuel smiled. "Time was always the plan." "What about grace?" Lyra asked. Samuel's smile softened. She chose to end her program after the last vault opened. She said humanity no longer needed a guardian, only accountability. "She trusted you," Lyra said. "She trusted the choice," Samuel corrected. Not everyone accepted the outcome. Some systems still refused human contact. Some species carried grudges too old to heal quickly. But fewer spoke openly of extermination now. Fewer called for fleets. The language of fear was slowly being replaced by caution, and sometimes, curiosity. Lyra returned to KX 7791 one final time. The vault was quiet now. Empty pods stood open like shells, their purpose fulfilled. Snow drifted across the landing site where fear once ruled. She stood there alone, staring at the sky. 40,000 years ago, humanity had sent a signal and vanished. Not a threat. A promise. And now, 10 years after their return, the galaxy was beginning to understand it. The hardest battles had never been fought with weapons. They had been fought with restraint, with patience, with the courage to choose differently. The galaxy never truly forgets. It remembers wars long after the weapons rust. It remembers fear longer than peace. And yet, memory is not destiny, only a test of whether the future must repeat the past. 20 years after the first human awakening, the test reached its final measure. Lyra Voss stood once more in the Galactic Conclave Assembly Hall, older now, her once bright Valori skin muted with age. She no longer wore a commander's uniform. Instead, she carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen history bend without breaking. At the center of the chamber stood Dr. Samuel Price again. This time he was not asking. "Humanity requests full membership in the Galactic Conclave," he said, voice steady. "Not as rulers, not as exceptions, but as equals." The chamber erupted. Supporters rose in unison. Novari, Mallory, fringe species once ignored by the great powers. Others remained seated, arms crossed, eyes cold. High sovereign wrath rose slowly. Time had weakened his body but sharpened his bitterness. "You have learned patience," he said. "I will grant you that. But patience is not proof. Power reveals truth." Samuel nodded. "Then judge us by the power we refuse to use." The chamber displays activated. Human war technologies, classified, devastating, were revealed for the first time. Weapons capable of obliterating fleets. Defensive systems that could render entire regions of space unreachable. The room fell silent. "We had these before we woke," Samuel continued. "We still have them. And we chose never to deploy them." Wrath stared at the images, mandibles trembling. "You expect us to believe restraint makes you safe?" "No," Samuel said softly. "Restraint makes us accountable." The debate lasted for days. History was argued line by line. Fear clashed with evidence. Memory wrestled with reality. When the vote finally came, the outcome was uncertain until the last tally. Humanity was granted full membership. Not unanimously, but undeniably. Lyra closed her eyes as the announcement echoed through the hall. The moment felt unreal, not triumphant, but heavy with meaning. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had convinced it. That night, the city celebrated. Delegations shared food, music, and stories beneath artificial skies glowing with the colors of 100 worlds. Humans moved through the crowd not as symbols, but as people. Lyra watched Daniel, older now, lines of laughter etched into his face, laughing with a group of Valori officers. "You did it," she said when he noticed her. Daniel shook his head. "We're still doing it." "Grace would have liked this," Lyra said. Daniel smiled softly. "She knew we wouldn't be perfect. She just wanted us to be better." Years later, historians would mark the moment differently. Not as the return of humanity, but as the moment the galaxy chose evolution over extermination. The Shepherd Initiative became required study across conclave space, not as a human story, but as a universal one. A lesson in restraint, in sacrifice, in the courage to step away from power when power is easiest to take. Lyra returned one final time to the edge of known space. She stood aboard a small observation vessel, watching stars form against the endless dark. Somewhere out there, new civilizations were rising, each carrying the same dangerous potential humanity once had. She activated a transmitter and sent a message into the void. Not encrypted, not hidden. A simple broadcast. "We were afraid once. We chose patience instead of dominance. If you are listening, know this. Change is possible, but only if you are willing to wait for it." She shut down the transmitter. The signal drifted outward, weak but persistent, much like the one she had discovered decades earlier on a forgotten frozen world. A signal from the past. A promise to the future. Lyra smiled as the stars reflected in the viewport. For the first time in 40,000 years, humanity was no longer a warning. They were an invitation.